Hello besties and welcome to another Genshin theory! Not too long ago, Hoyoverse uploaded a video showing what every Harbinger looks like. I've been a Genshin fan since 1.1, so I've seen most of the fandom's reactions to stuff. I've never seen us freak out over anything quite like this video. So to get those views, and also just cause it's fun, I'm gonna do an analysis of the video and each of the Harbingers in it. I won't be talking much about Childe or Scaramouche since we already know everything we need to know about them. The video, A Winter Night's Lazo, shows 9 of the 11 Fatui Harbingers reacting to Signora's death. Scaramouche is missing as expected. We learn that he cut off contact with the Fatui a while ago. This is briefly mentioned by a few of the Harbingers, but they're more focused on the recent passing of their comrade. Each one of them has a different reaction. Some of them are emotional, while others don't care at all. Pulcinella says that to mourn Signora's death, work in the Fatui has been halted for half a day. Arlecchino chimes in and calls him a heartless dignitary. It seems like she's standing up for Signora and saying that half a day isn't enough. She also says that she doesn't want to make the children cry. In the World Quest A Very Special Fortune slip, we learn that Arlecchino runs an orphanage called the House of the Hearth in Snezhnaya. The children here are raised as members of the Fatui and sent on infiltration missions across the continent once they're old enough. Despite literally raising child soldiers, Arlecchino seems to actually care for the children. Those who grew up in the House of the Hearth are quite close with one another. In this video, she says that the heartless businessmen and dignitaries wouldn't understand how it feels to lose someone and that she wants to keep the children happy. In Commedia dell'arte, Arlecchino is a man in love with Columbina, but Columbina and Pierro are married. Genshin's version of Arlecchino shows her as a woman. I don't think that Genshin's Pierro and Columbina are romantically involved, but I do like the idea of Arlecchino and Columbina being girlfriends. Thanks to Honkai, we know that Hoyoverse isn't afraid to put lesbian couples in their games, so I love the idea of Arlecchino and Columbina being together. I don't imagine Pierro being in the picture at all just because he's too busy with avenging Conria. I don't think he really has the time or energy to date. Columbina and Arlecchino were the most affected by Signora's death, and when Arlecchino calls out the others for not caring, she doesn't address Columbina as heartless. Even if they aren't dating in Genshin, I think that Columbina and Arlecchino have some kind of close relationship, possibly being friends or family. Pantalone is the 9th Fatui Harbinger. He's obsessed with money. He was born into poverty and resented Celestia for never giving him a vision so he could get rich. He's in charge of all of Snezhnaya's financial policies, and his codename Regrator literally means that he buys things then resells them at higher prices. Pantalone has a few connections to Liyue. He says that he's a banker at the Northland Bank, which is in Liyue Harbor, and Yelan stole a coat from him that she now wears. I like the idea of Pantalone being from Liyue because it makes his backstory make a little more sense. Liyue is the country of commerce and money, so his fixation on becoming wealthy makes a lot more sense if he's from there. Ningguang has a similar backstory, although she actually got a vision while Pantalone did not. I really enjoyed the idea of those two growing up in the same community. Maybe they knew each other as kids and they both grew up to achieve their goals of becoming wealthy, just through different means. I've seen a lot of people say that they think Baizhu is Pantalone. To be honest, I think that's a stupid idea. The only canon similarities are that they like getting money and that they wear similar glasses. I hate the idea of them being the same person because I feel like it devalues both of them as individuals. I don't understand why a Fatui Harbinger would randomly live a double life as a pharmacist and an adoptive father to a young girl. There's literally no reason for that. However, if I'm right about Pantalone being from Liyue, I could see them being related. Maybe they're brothers or something. Baizhu seems unbothered by the Fatui, even easily agreeing to a deal with them just to get coconut milk for Chi-Chi. He may not feel threatened by them because his relative would protect him from any threats that the Fatui pose to him. In the video, Pantalone suggests that half a day off isn't enough to honor Signora's sacrifice. He doesn't put up as much of a fight as Arlecchino does, but he does care a little bit. That being said, he's smiling, laughing, and joking, so I don't think he cares all that much. We know almost nothing about Capitano. The only mention we get of him in-game is from Victor, who says that he would rather work for Capitano than Signora. In the video, Capitano seems very detached from Signora's death. He says that her sacrifice tarnished her honor, but he would not let it hinder the Fatui's progress. He refers to her using her last name Loafalter rather than Signora or her real name Rosalind. He's mostly just focused on his work. He asked Dottore about Scaramouche's whereabouts, which is completely out of nowhere for the conversation. Commedia dell'arte's Capitano is an arrogant liar. It's believed that he never was a captain, but he just says that he is. He often makes up stories that make him seem cool and strong when he's actually quite skittish. In Genshin, Capitano's face is completely obscured by his mask. Everybody else either has a mask that partially covers their face or they don't wear it often. Implications in Commedia dell'arte could mean that Genshin's Capitano is actually more emotional about Signora's passing than he's letting on, and he's using his mask to cover his expression and appear stoic. Pulcinella is the 5th Fatui Harbinger and mayor of Snezhnaya's main city. He was the one who mandated half a day off in memory of Signora. Although Signora was over 500 years old and Pierro is likely around the same age that she was, Pulcinella appears to be the oldest. Commedia dell'arte's Pulcinella is an opportunist who always wants to be in the right. His main goals are self-preservation and promotion, yet he's usually the one to save other characters from trouble. Genshin's Pulcinella seems somewhat detached from Signora's death, but I still think he cares. He refers to her as their dear comrade. The half day off from work is a short amount of time, but I think this is just him trying to play both sides. He does care that Signora is dead, being the one who speaks at her funeral, but he also wants to be able to get back to work to further his own plans. Columbina seems to be one of the few affected by Signora's death. We see her lying on top of the coffin singing Signora's theme.
We are gathered here today to remember our dear comrade.
Columbina's mask is tied fully around her head. On the back is a white butterfly reminiscent of Signora's moth motif. Obviously, butterflies and moths are not the same thing, but they're pretty close. Butterflies actually evolved from moths. The outfits the Harbingers are wearing in this video are likely not their everyday clothing. Child appears in clothes that we've never seen him in before, so I assume the same can be said for the others since they're all kinda matching. Maybe Columbina wore this specific mask in honor of her fallen comrade. In his voice lines, Child says that the Harbingers are ranked by strength. Columbina is the 3rd Fatui Harbinger. From what little we've seen, she appears cute and caring, but Child says that he was hesitant to fight her. Knowing Child, that's saying something. He loves to fight people, but he was too scared to go up against Columbina. Despite seeing him in the comic, this version of Dottore looks completely different. This Dottore is unlike what any of us were expecting. A while ago, leakers suggested that Dottore is actually a collection of artificial people, each one in a different stage of life. Whether or not they're modified robots is unknown. This is kind of a silly comparison, but if any of you read the Five Nights at Freddy's books, you'll remember how Charlie was a series of 4 robots to represent each stage of her life. I assume this is how Dottore functions. At the end of the video, we hear Columbina tell Dottore that he looks young today, but Dottore says that he doesn't take that as a compliment. She then asks where the segment in the prime of his life is. Referring to these clones as segments really stuck out to me. It reminded me of how easily people can just split themselves up into multiple versions of themselves into that. The Primordial One and Agedaha both split themselves up into multiple entities. I think the Thunderbird did the same thing, and that's why Oz exists. This is such a weird thing, yet it happens more than once. I think the Dottore we saw in this video and the one in the comic are both the real Dottore. The events in the comic took place 4 years ago. Dottore could have easily just grown his hair out and changed his mask in that time. We saw Dottore learn how to create a modified automaton out of a human in the comic. If I remember correctly, that was the first time he'd done it. I think that he used that knowledge to create clones of himself. One of the clones probably looks like the Dottore we saw in the comic, but that doesn't mean that that comic Dottore is a clone. If we see that version of Dottore in-game, I assume that one would be a clone. I think that's the version of Dottore that Columbina was referring to. Sandrone literally says 2 words in the video, so I don't have much to go off of here. She says utterly risible after Child breaks up the argument between Pulcinella, Pantalone, and Arlecchino. I had to look up what risible meant, and it basically just means funny. It's quite a lighthearted comment for the situation. I don't think she necessarily cares that Signora is dead. Sandrone is carried around by a modified Conrian automaton. Child says that she's always researching these robots, and that specific one follows her around everywhere. Sandrone isn't the only Fatui Harbinger interested in Conrian robotics, though. In the comic, Dottore transformed his subordinate Krupp into a ruin hunter. Sandrone seems to be more interested in the robotics side of things, while Dottore is more invested in biology. I think we'll probably see these two team up on a project at some point. Dottore is touted as the science man of the Fatui, but Sandrone seems equally into that. With their shared interest in Conrian robots, they'll probably come up with some horrific Lovecraftian robot monster that we have to fight later on in the game. The Adventurers Guild was founded in Snezhnaya. Identical versions of Catherine can be found throughout Teyvat, each one stationed at a different branch of the guild. Some of Catherine's idle lines are error and rebooting, and she has a keyhole on the back of her neck. Because of this, lots of people, including myself, believe that she's a series of robots. If Catherine is a robot, it makes sense for Sandrone to be her inventor. Sandrone seems to be the robotics expert of the Fatui and Snezhnaya as a whole, and since the Adventurers Guild is in Snezhnaya, maybe creating the Catherine bots was a side project for her. I already did a whole video on Pierro, so I won't waste your time and repeat everything I said there. I don't think that this video disproves anything I've been thinking about him. If anything, it just solidifies it. In summary, I said that Pierro is from Conria and had some relation to the ruling Eclipse dynasty. He attempted to stop the Cataclysm but failed. There he met the Tsaritsa, who was equally traumatized by what she witnessed and had to do in Conria. They teamed up with the goal of making Celestia pay for what they did to all those innocent people 500 years ago. Pierro's dialogue in this video supports that. Near the end of Signora's funeral, he says, "In the name of Her Majesty the Tsaritsa, we will seize authority from the gods." This sentiment clearly doesn't involve the Archons because the Tsaritsa is one of them. By the gods, he and the other Harbingers by extension mean Celestia. Pierro is one of the few who are upset by Signora's death. He and Arlecchino are the only ones who refer to her by her real name, Rosalind. Pierro promises Signora that her final resting place will be the entirety of the old world. By this, I think he means Teyvat under Celestia's control. The whole point of the Fatui is to support the Tsaritsa in forcing Celestia to relinquish its control, so of course Signora would want that to happen. I've seen a lot of people theorizing that Pierro is Kaya's biological father. I think that's a really cool idea, although there really isn't any evidence for it. We know that both of them are Conrian, but other than that, there's nothing. I just think it's a fun idea that I'd like to see expanded upon in the actual game rather than just our heads. The video opens and closes with the Crimson Lotus moth flying through the snow. In the opening sequence, the moth flies into what I assume is Zapliarni Palace and comes across Pierro playing a game of chess. On the board sits two of the Gnosis, both of which were seized by Signora. Pierro uses a knight to take out a pawn, then the moth lands on the knocked over piece in front of him. Pierro then says that on this chessboard, checkmate is not where the game ends. I've been trying to get good at chess for these Genshin theories, but I'm still not the best, so correct me if I'm wrong. Checkmate means that the king is in a position where it cannot escape being captured. The king is the only piece that has to stay on the board for the entire game, so if your king is captured, you lose. Pierro is implying that even if you're trapped and the only solution is to die, that isn't necessarily the end of your life. This line is said while the moth looks directly into the camera, as if to say that this applies to it. I know it might sound crazy to say that Signora isn't actually dead, but hear me out. Pyro has properties that allow users to communicate with the dead. Hutao received her Pyro vision while visiting her grandfather in the afterlife. Her signature weapon makes reference to a Hindu ritual wherein you can communicate with the dead through fire. The Natlan Archon quest subtitle and Dainsleif's dialogue in the Travail trailer imply that the Pyro Archon Murata has either died and come back to life and/or can bring dead people back to life. Pyro has something about it that transcends death. Signora was arguably the most prominent Pyro user ever. She's known as the Crimson Witch of Flames, who learned how to wield Pyro without a vision or delusion. This is unheard of anywhere else in Teyvat. Signora's use of Pyro was so strong that maybe the transcendental properties of it applied to her when she died. I'm not saying that her body is just suddenly going to be reanimated, though. I think her human body is truly dead, but something within her has survived. I think that Crimson Lotus moth represents her soul, will, or ambition. It flew all the way from Inazuma to Snezhnaya, the two furthest points from each other on Teyvat's map. Chi-Chi's fifth constellation is called Crimson Lotus Bloom. This increases her elemental skill talent by 3 levels. This is how Chi-Chi heals. The only other mention of the phrase Crimson Lotus is in Signora's boss fight, where we have to use Crimson Lotus moths to get her out of the ice cocoon she encases herself in. In Buddhist belief, crimson lotus flowers are related to the afterlife. It makes sense for Chi-Chi to have a reference to this specific flower because she's a zombie, so Signora must have a similar explanation. I don't know if we'll see Signora alive again, though. I doubt we'll see the Signora that we've come to know again, but maybe we'll reunite with some iteration of her, even if it is just a crimson lotus moth. I can't believe we get to see what all of the Harbingers look like. This is how I felt back in 1.3 when we saw Dainsleif in-game. I didn't think we'd be meeting him in-game for years, just like how I thought we wouldn't see the Harbingers in the game for years. So everybody comment your favorite Harbinger, because I'm sure you all have one. I'm torn between Pierro and Columbina, because I love the story I've come up with for Pierro, but I also just love Columbina's design and voice. I've also seen lots of love for Pantalone and Arlecchino, which is totally valid because they seem really cool and I like them a lot too. Thank you so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you next time. Bye, besties!